What we found through Mr. Mueller's report was alarming. The president failed every criterion for rational and reality-based decision-making capacity. My name is Dr. Bandy Lee. I'm a forensic psychiatrist at Yale School of Medicine. A forensic psychiatrist does evaluations for the courts and testifies before legal or governmental bodies. My views are my own, although I do represent the World Mental Health Coalition as its president. My colleagues and I assessed Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report from a mental health perspective. What we found through Mr. Mueller's report was alarming. The president failed every criterion for rational and reality-based decision-making capacity. Our assessment is definitive. Our recommendations were, first and foremost, to remove Mr. Trump from access to nuclear weapons and war-making powers. We could offer many more, but given the urgency, we decided to focus on the two most important: the instability and impulsivity that led us to the brink of war with Iran should illustrate the importance of mental capacity in a president. His actions are exactly what we would predict from an individual who lacks mental capacity. Much of this may have been preventable if we had regular fitness for duty tests for presidents and vice presidents before they even take office. All military personnel who handle nuclear weapons must pass rigorous psychological testing before they assume their duties and must renew it every year. Yet the person who commands nuclear weapons does not. What we performed was a mental capacity evaluation. It tests function, not diagnosis, and in this case, the ability of someone to make sound decisions free of impulsivity, recklessness, paranoia, and false beliefs. To demonstrate mental capacity, one has to be able to take in information and advice, to appreciate and make flexible use of that information, to consider consequences based on rational, reality-based, and reliable thinking without undue interference from impulsivity, conspiracy theories, emotional needs, or fluctuating inconsistency, and to refrain from behavior that places oneself or others in danger. Mr. Trump showed enough evidence to both allies and opponents, as well as in his incitement to violence in public, that he did not possess these abilities. Our work is not about Mr. Trump, who may not be a danger as a private citizen, but about protecting society against the powers of the presidency in a person who has not demonstrated the ability to handle them. As the evidence was overwhelming, and since outside perspectives are more important in a functional exam than a personal interview, we did not feel we needed one. The wealth and quality of the report's content made this possible. In fact, we had more and better data under sworn testimony than we have ever had in our usual practice.
Welcome once more to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York. And that was Bandy Lee, who is our guest today in a short clip from Now This News in 2019. Most rational Americans, and we'll see Bandy and talk with her in just a few minutes, but most rational Americans, whatever their political leanings, already understand that our president has significant, severe, ongoing, and deep psychological and personality problems. These ordinary people see and get that as obvious. Foreign leaders around the world whisper and talk behind his back about his ignorance, mental instability, incoherence, and inchoate impulsivity. His closest political ally, Senate Majority Leader and enabler-in-chief Mitch McConnell, admits he knew from the start that Trump was unequipped to lead, has called the president nuts, considers himself much smarter than Trump, and has stated he can't stand him. They may detest each other, but demagogic political leaders need each other to win at all costs. Juan Gonzalez, just today on Democracy Now!, reports how right-wing Trump supporters, egged on by the president, have recently been brandishing automatic weapons at protests to demand an end to coronavirus shutdowns. As Juan put it, make no mistake, this country is edging closer and closer to neo-fascist authoritarianism. The reality that is too painful and frightening for many of us is to confront during this most devastating public health crisis in 100 years and understand that our country is under the leadership of someone who is severely mentally impaired and lacking the mental and cognitive capacity to sustain rationality and authentic empathy and love for the very people he's been elected to serve and protect. Even more to the point, he's proving dangerous to civic life, to our democracy, and a threat to the nation's mental health and safety, endangering the lives of millions of people here and life itself around the world. It's long past time for us as individuals and as a country to not be complicit and become silent partners to the abuse, viciousness, hate, and insanity around us. We need to state the obvious so that we don't feel as if we are the ones confined to a mental institution. We need to resist and take action to assure that the edging closer to neo-fascist authoritarian rule stops and is turned around. As psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton puts it, what's happening in the country is not simply part of our democratic process. It's not politically and even ethically normal. If we do let it happen, a dangerous presence becomes normalized, and malignant normality comes to dominate our governing. Our guest today at the Radical Imagination has courageously and forcefully taken on these issues as both a distinguished forensic psychiatrist and as a radically loving spiritual progressive. Bandy Lee is a forensic psychiatrist at Yale School of Medicine and a project group leader for the World Health Organization Violence Prevention Alliance. She received her MD from the Yale School of Medicine and a Master of Divinity from Yale. Interned at Bellevue, was chief resident at Massachusetts General, a research fellow at Harvard Medical School, a fellow of the National Institute of Mental Health, and teaches at Yale Law School. In 2017, she organized a conference at Yale on professional ethics surrounding the mental health of Donald Trump, and later edited the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, a book of essays by 37 prominent psychiatrists, psychologists, and mental health experts warning against the dangers of Trump's mental instability. In 2019, as the president of the newly formed World Mental Health Coalition, comprised of more than 800 mental health professionals, Bandy held a major conference at the National Press Club with 13 top national experts in the fields of psychiatry, law, nuclear science, and climate science, and offered prescriptions for survival, which we'll talk about a little later in the show. There are now over 70,000 supporters, and in December of 2019, 350 mental health professionals co-signed a letter to Congress stating that Donald Trump's deteriorating mental health constituted a threat to the safety of our nation. She takes her duty to warn responsibly, and we need to take it as well. Thank you so much, Bandy, for being on the Radical Imagination. It's so great to see you again, and you've been involved in so many things. The last time we've met was a few months ago, I guess, but you've been doing so much writing and organizing, and it's just terrific to have you here. We're so honored and pleased.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. It's an honor to be here.
Well, and this is what our third or fourth show together, and it's you were right. You were right. What was it? 3 years ago in warning us and raising some of the same issues that you are now fully involved in. Give our audience a little bit of a background to the Goldwater rule and you as a forensic psychiatrist and how you responded to that. and how, in fact, that led to this incredible book here. It's The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. Have it very handy here by my bookshelf. So tell us a little about that Goldwater rule and what it all is about and why you have responded to that as you have.
Well, that is one of the reasons why I came to be involved in speaking up in public, because in the very beginning, it seemed like we had very much a consensus from the very start when I spoke with my colleagues around me at Yale and elsewhere, that we agreed that the president was dangerous. But when the American Psychiatric Association came out with a change in the rules of how we speak about public figures, that was very alarming to me. In fact, now we have a parallel in the Attorney General, William Barr, coming out ahead of the Mueller Report and framing it in a way that allows distortion of the law in order to protect power, instead of representing the law as Attorney General. So what I found the American Psychiatric Association to be doing was, just as we were gearing up to speak about this dangerous president that we saw, that we felt we were especially equipped to be able to speak about, it came out with a change in ethics entirely to the opposite of what the Goldwater rule was intended to be. And let me explain a little bit.
Sure.
The original Goldwater rule is actually an affirmative obligation to protect public health and to meet our responsibility to society, because our ethics say that we not only have a responsibility to patients, but also to society, equally so. And in order to participate in activities that improve the community and better public health, when we're asked about a public figure, we should educate the public, just not diagnose.
Not diagnose, because you need to be able to give a diagnosis only, right, when you have a face-to-face exam with that person. Is that correct?
That actually is outdated. That part is not correct either.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's outdated. All right.
So it discourages diagnosis, and we don't really diagnose someone who's not a patient. And once we examine them and diagnose or review the appropriate information and diagnose, we don't reveal that information. So
Right.
that part actually is not even worth stating.
Mm-hmm.
But with the Trump administration, they expanded that part to include not just diagnosis, but any comment of any kind on a public figure. Do you see the difference there?
Yes, big difference. And that was in 2017.
Yes, less than 2 months after inauguration. And that was so shocking to me, because if anything, we had First Amendment rights. The Constitution is meant to protect society against tyranny. And we were in a position to be able to recognize would-be tyrant personalities. And they were telling us we could not speak about this in any situation, even in a national emergency. And that goes against every other ethical tenet in medicine that I have learned about and had been keeping. And while I was a staunch defender of the Goldwater rule before then for 20 years, even as a forensic psychiatrist who's exempt from it, I still thought it was a good rule before the distortion. The distortion actually violates the Goldwater rule because you're prohibiting education, you're prohibiting protecting public health, and you're telling psychiatrists to go against the Geneva Declaration, the Universal Pledge to protect humanity and to serve humanitarian goals, which was established after the experience of Nazism. So there's an express pledge that we take, a universal pledge all health professionals in the world to speak up when there are humanitarian violations.
And Bandy, you brought up Nazism just very briefly. What were the positions of many German psychiatrists put in that position during the rise of Nazism? How did they respond? What pressures were they under?
So by the time Nazism was rising in Germany, they thought that in order to keep academia rigorous,
Mm.
um, it was actually from academia that it came out that professionals should stay out of politics, and so it applied not just to psychiatrists but to the clergy, to political scientists, to all manner of intellectuals. And we see now just how detrimental that is. And that's exactly why the the World Medical Association decided to make it expressly a goal that we do speak up when there are humanitarian violations by a destructive government. And this is exactly what was happening. And the American Psychiatric Association created this gag rule, this new gag order, because it's an absolute prohibition, and publicized it. It had no legal power, no power over its non-members. It's a voluntary association, and not all psychiatrists belong to it. No other non-psychiatrist mental health professional is really closely involved with it. And so it should really be, it's actually a guideline. It's a guideline of a voluntary association that has never been enforced. And they made it into something that the general public now takes as the law. They confuse it with patient confidentiality, when in fact it's a mere etiquette toward public figures who aren't even patients.
Right. And as you point out, a gag law or gag rule against your freedom to speak out. Now, what do you say to people who said, well, this is all politics and you just don't approve of Donald Trump, his policies, and yeah, he may be a little quirky and a little too self-indulgent, too much into himself, and lies here and there, and so on. So what do you say to that? What do you say to your critics who say, well, this is all politics? You're whatever, trying to sell books or whatever else reasons they may want to put as motivation. Is it
Well, we
politics?
made sure that we would be keeping professionalism, and for that reason, we donated all proceeds of the book in order to keep ourselves free of conflicts of interests, including financial. And it is a guideline in our ethics that we have to remain neutral, including politically neutral.
Mhm.
And that does not mean we do not speak. It means we speak to the degree of the medical findings, not attenuate our voices because of political convenience either. But relegating it to pure politics is exactly what happens when you exclude expert voices, when you exclude the professionals who have standard procedures, science behind them, and can produce opinions that are objective and can form a consensus once you have enough information, because that is what we are trained in. And that is why intellectual voices are so critical in a democracy, just as journalistic voices are, because it has it is standardized and it is free of political influence, has a convention and a tradition within itself that would keep itself free of bias as much as it can be, or at least systematically tries to exclude bias in ways that political opinion and political punditry cannot.
Right, right. Well put. Tell our audience a little about the medical issues, the disease model you're talking about, the pathology. you've used such words as collective mental illness or shared psychosis, shared symptoms, silent partners, and abusive relationships. Educate our audience a little bit to that sorts of psychiatric jargon, if you will, and the medical model, that you're applying.
Sure. I think what you said earlier about how our normality changes into a malignant normality, it actually is going from a healthy normality to a malignant pathological normality. And human beings adopt to all sorts of situations. And so we are essentially making the pathological normal in a malignant normality. And I think that is really what we were trying to point out, that abnormality is not the same as healthy normality. And pathology works in a very different way than healthy variation. There's a wide variety of healthy choice, healthy ideology, and healthy decision making that is all permissible, and it's all life affirming because it comes from a healthy place. But when it comes from a pathological place, it's almost the opposite. No matter what idea one holds, no matter what one intends, the end result will be destructive and results in damage and death. So important. Why are important?
Go ahead. We've gotten a little oh, there we are.
We're trying to say
We're
something.
back.
I also wish to say that people often think of mental health professionals as only diagnosing. In fact, diagnosis is a small fraction of what we do. Even with my own patients, I only diagnose them a fraction of the time. The rest of the time, we're assessing different dimensions, aspects, and what's relevant for someone in office, their influence on the public, is their mental capacity and their dangerousness, not the diagnosis. In fact, all kinds of diagnoses and mental illnesses can affect all kinds of positions. Lincoln was said to have had major depression. Winston Churchill also suffered. Theodore Roosevelt also suffered. And they all functioned very well, have been exceptional leaders in their positions. And so diagnosis makes no difference in terms of functionality, in terms of ability to function in office. The ability to function in office is measured by mental capacity. And that's something that just briefly involves the ability to take in information like facts, scientific evidence, advice, and to process that information, to make sound, stable decisions based on reality and thinking about consequences. So it's the ability to make rational decisions. Fortunately for that, we had exactly the information we needed in the Mueller Report. And so we had better information for any kind of mental capacity we could ever have, all inside the Mueller Report in abundance under sworn testimony. So we did a capacity evaluation as a service to the public soon after the Mueller Report came out. And we invited a personal examination is not really necessary, but we did make an invitation to the president asking to please let us know within 3 weeks if he would like to present for an examination. If he considered himself fit, he should present because we had enough evidence to show that he was unfit. But of course, he didn't respond. We did get indication he got the message, but he didn't respond. So we went ahead with our conclusions, and he, in fact, failed every single category of mental capacity.
Wow. And again, the methodology that you're talking about here, that was contained in the Mueller report, and you've been able to observe him through his tweets and extended interviews, conversations with people who've known him for a long time, and so on. So the methodology does bring out a certain objectivity about his behavior that then you can make statements as you have, correct? About his personality and his mental health.
Correct.
Right.
For the information that is relevant and important to us, we have everything we need. For the information that's unimportant, not of our business, in fact, his personal care as a personal patient, we don't have, but we don't care about that. We care about our patient in this case is actually society. We're charged with caring for our patients and for society. Public figure is not important to us as a patient because we're not his provider, but he is relevant to us as we're trying to care for society. And in that context, we have all the information we need. In fact, we have it in abundance. And when I was giving grand rounds once at Mass Mental Center at Harvard, we were all sitting around, and someone mentioned that he knew Donald Trump better than any patient he ever had in his career. And it was funny, we broke out in laughter because we all agreed.
Mm-hmm. So you are following this duty to warn. And tell us how the coronavirus, in your opinion, has made his already fragile mental instability even worse, and the danger has increased. How would you explain that to our audience?
Well, as soon as I heard about the coronavirus and it's spreading in China, I became afraid of exactly what is happening now. Because while we couldn't have predicted a viral pandemic as a particular crisis, we could predict what would happen with a president who was lacking mental capacity. And his response is exactly of someone who lacks mental capacity. As you know, and as everyone knows now, that early action is critical when we have a pandemic. And he would have been told, and now we know he has been told, even as early as November, that it was important for him to act early. And the intelligence officials and medical experts were telling him, were blinking red lights at him, stating he needed to act early. And his inability to take in that evidence, that advice, his need to fight reality, in fact, with his own alternative version of reality, caused him not only to fail to do what was needed, but to block every step of the way people who were trying to do what was needed.
Yeah.
He refused to use tests. He dragged his feet on testing because the economy for his reelection, but mostly for his own psyche and his psychic consolation, if you will, because he can't tolerate reality. And that is what we're seeing every step of the way, not just in terms of initial management, but he is doing the maximum possible to increase the suffering and death through his failure to provide supplies, his pitting states against one another when even if we collaborated in full force, it is a difficult problem to deal with through his demonstration of defiance against rules and laws to try to protect ourselves, to reduce transmission. And now he's trying to reopen the states by threatening insurrection through his press briefings every day. It is nothing but trying to promulgate his alternative vision of reality, which puts people in greater danger. And it's because of this that we have outranked every nation on earth in terms of severity and critical nature of our affliction with the virus.
So there's a fascinating dynamics. So this scary but fascinating. So this alternative vision of reality that he needs to hold on to gives him a sense of what about himself that he hangs on to for dear life.
Mhm.
Because admitting anything else would mean what to his fragile psyche?
Well, as you said, it's most of us have a stable sense of self so that we can move beyond ourselves and look at the world and solve problems and do what is needed uh, to respond to the situation. He is mainly at the level of trying to survive every moment of his existence to try to prop up his fragile sense of self. And the reality that uh, reality as it exists, he tolerate because in reality he is empty, inadequate, um, incapable, and that is the reality he is trying to fight as well as cover up,
Yeah.
which makes him incapable of learning, incapable of allowing others to give him better advice. And so he has to direct everything the way he wishes. And he's basically trying to keep this inflated image of himself, which cannot be sustained with any grounding in reality. And right now, um, it's causing the whole nation to go down. And he is still trying to protect his fragile sense of self.
So one of the aims that you're getting us to see here is to also mobilize and stand up, stand truth to power here, and take our make realize that we have a stand, that we need to take a stand at this point, whether we're journalists, forensic psychiatrists, academic, whoever, and certainly when we get into the political realm, it's the political opponents, or one would hope within the Republican Party as well as Democratic Party. We have a two-party system. One would expect and hope that you have forceful, coherent leadership calling attention to that. But are we getting that?
I think that that is what has been critically lacking at every level. And I think it is because we as a culture, as a nation, have never experienced a mentally impaired, pathological president before.
Yeah.
And now that he is here, we do not know how to deal with him. We don't know how to correct the gaslighting he does every single day that he interacts with people. We are thrown off balance when he bullies and bulldozes other people because he's trying to exert his version of reality. And then through the sheer presence of a disturbed, untreated person in an influential position over time, you have the contagion of symptoms that happens with
Yeah.
mental symptoms. People don't think of mental symptoms as being infectious, but they're actually more infectious than physical symptoms because you do not require physical contact. It transmits through emotional bonds. And
Mhm.
so when people wonder why his followers are so unlike what they might have been before, they seemed sane before, and now they are completely detached from reality. That is what you are seeing, a contagion of mental symptoms. Now, the fortunate side of that is that it is treatable. We see it happen in settings, underserved settings, where patients become severely ill and their families, gang members, prison cell block members become equally deranged, if you will.
Right.
But once you remove the contact, they become their own old selves again. And the transformation is quite dramatic. So we can expect the same, that much that is afflicting the nation could be reduced simply, or could be started. The healing process could be started simply through the removal of the president or Donald Trump from the office of the presidency. And, but the opposite is true if we keep him there.
And you have, as you well know, enablers and facilitators in this process. And you've recently have gotten the wrath of Alan Dershowitz, who did an article about, right, and in which you described him as being part of a collective psychosis or shared psychosis with Donald Trump in his attempt to defend him. Tell us a little about that. Tell us, it's not just about Dershowitz, of course. I mean, you see these journalists kowtow to him all the time, and so on these farcical presidential press conferences he has every day. It's just maddening to see what these journalists get put down right and left, and they say, "Sir, excuse me." I mean, so here's a very bright, articulate individual who also is, you argue, is caught up with this in this shared psychosis. So you want to explain a little more about that?
Yes, that seemed to have irked him quite a bit. He wrote articles about me and tried to get me fired from Yale.
Hmm.
Um,
The civil
but
libertarian that he is. Okay. Yeah.
yes, Richard Painter got on his case about,
Wow.
big defender if he is, if he's,
Defender.
uh, it upset him that I mentioned the phrase shared psychosis. So I should clarify that even though it is called shared psychosis, it doesn't mean it's always psychosis that is shared. It just means shared symptoms. But it used to mean, it used to be à deux, or folie if it's the whole population. It's a shared madness, because it seems almost as if people are possessed. Uh, People who have known individuals who are affected by this before say they hardly recognize the person. And my brother-in-law actually studied Dershowitz, and he too said he could not recognize the man, even though he may have had some of those traits before he became an ally of Donald Trump. He especially became notable with those features, and that is what you see. That in cases of shared psychosis, the healthy individuals, the previously healthy individuals, no matter how intelligent they were or how sound-minded they were, no one is immune with through emotional bonds. If they feel attachment to the primary figure, and the figure and there's great exposure to that primary figure who is afflicted with a mental pathology, then they come to take on the same symptoms as if they had the primary illness themselves.
Fascinating. Well, yeah, I'm just going to say this here right now. Alan has been on this show. We had him on, I think, a couple of years ago, and he's welcome to come on with, and he, I know you've asked him to discuss this and debate it, and he's said he's willing to, and for whatever travel reasons, or so we can both have you here, and you're open to that, right?
He would not come to debate.
Well, he doesn't have to come. He just flips on his Zoom there, wherever he is. So that tells you a little something. But I'll make the offer, and we'll see what happens. But so tell us now. You have this prescription for survival that came out of the 2019 conference at the National Press Club, where I was. I went to that as well. Tell us a little about that. What this is. Putting what you're talking about into some sort of concrete form that Americans can respond to, relate to, and take some action about, right? So tell us a little about that.
Yes, we did hold a conference, a multidisciplinary conference back in March 2019, to show how everyone from all these different fields agreed that the president was unfit from each of their perspectives. Now, after that, we did the mental capacity exam, which explains why that was the case, because mental capacity is based on any kind of fitness for any position, not just presidential. Now, about a month ago, when we were recognizing that simply too many people were dying because of the coronavirus pandemic, the symptoms that the president was exhibiting were no longer benign. Every minute that he would speak during the press briefings, for example, I could sense hundreds more people dying than necessary because of the things that were said, because of the emotional needs that were being communicated, and the worldview that he was in his viewers. And so we decided to issue a prescription for survival. People can access it directly through prescriptionforsurvival.org. And it is our prescription as mental health professionals through the World Mental Health Coalition, which, as you had mentioned, it's a professional group of all mental health professionals who gathered around this cause. But now other health professionals have joined us, those who are outside of the mental health profession. So other physicians, allied professionals, and we put out this prescription, and many hundreds and close to 1,000 are signing it now. But we put out this prescription essentially of removal of the president's influence on the coronavirus pandemic. So we recommend a repetition of impeachment, this time televising his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Or we could do any number of things. His assassination of the foremost ranking Iranian general back in January, or any of the dozen articles of impeachment that were not included the first time around. So we were recommending either repeat impeachment or institute the 25th Amendment or section, which is for mental incapacity, and or have him undergo a mental health evaluation and follow through with the recommendations, or that he be asked to resign, offering him immunity from prosecution, so that the resignation would be expeditious. That's what we're mainly concerned about, removing the dangers. And lastly, we recommend, if any of those options cannot be done, then all decision making regarding coronavirus be removed from the president, and all press briefings happen at the CDC's headquarters with medical experts only. Those were our options while we prescribe removal of influence, regardless of means. That is our medical mandate that we're prescribing.
That you're prescribing. And the complete removal of decision making about this public health emergency from the president, and establishing a coronavirus crisis department headed by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention personnel, with whatever funds and authority it deems required. Sounds very reasonable and rational. So how are you're getting people to sign on to this? You are publicizing this. You are doing what else to make this happen? This is going to be quite a venture here. It's a necessary one. How are you? What other things are you planning?
Well, I have been writing about this and interviewing about this for the past month.
Right.
And we've also been fundraising in order to have this publicized, since the major media would not have us. We are somehow blacklisted from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and network and cable programs. We have been for almost a year now. And this is also a very concerning trend, that all my interviews would be killed and my quotes would be deleted from the major media. And so we were thinking that we would buy a full page ad. Now that's not being realized at this time because we're still fundraising.
Because you used to be on often, weren't you? As you say, about a year ago and more. And then
every single program, every
Yeah,
major
absolutely.
network, every major network and cable program I have been invited onto. Some of them I declined, thinking at the time I didn't wish to sensationalize this issue, but producers continue to invite me, editors continue to invite, and reporters continue to interview me for quite some time, but they were all killed before being aired. And it started
by who? By the highest levels of what?
Well, during our interdisciplinary conference in March of last year, a reporter was there and could not believe that an unprecedented meeting of such nationally renowned figures all in one place on an unprecedented topic was not getting the press coverage that one would have expected. And I was invited to about 9 different programs, CNN and MSNBC. Richard Painter was, and ultimately all of them were canceled. All of them were canceled at last minute. And so he was very alarmed and said, there must be a memo, meaning a memo has been circulated among the top people so that even as producers continue to invite us, we would never be aired. And now that that has been the result 100% of the time for a year and a half, or actually 2.5 years in terms of trend, we believe that reporter was correct.
Yeah, and Richard Painter was on. He was a regular MSNBC, correct? I mean,
but in relation to us, he was canceled.
He was
when he was scheduled in relation to us. So it's really about us, about mental health professionals speaking.
Shared psychosis at the highest levels.
Well, it is dangerous. It is dangerous to bring in experts about the number one national emergency at this time, which is the mental health of the president.
That is not dangerous at all. It's what's needed. That's what we need to hear from.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly.
But exactly. And you were mentioning Juan Gonzalez talking about this becoming a fascistic state. That is exactly what happens in a fascist state, that what needs to be discussed is exactly what is suppressed.
Well, not on the radical imagination. And so you're always going to be invited here, and it's an open forum. We only just have a couple more minutes, but I was very touched by a tweet that you put out, I guess, 1 or 2 days ago. And I want our audience to hear this. It's a short one. And this must go more coming from your divinity degree, right, as a spiritual progressive from Yale. But this is you a couple days ago. I'm tweeting. I know I did not have to pour more depressing news on you, but my vision is ultimately hopeful. Our entire world is wounded, and there is always room for correcting course and learning. We are all in this together, which is also why I do not discount one person. As a spiritual progressive, I know as an academic, as a criminologist, we talk about differential association. One can unlearn deviance. One can unlearn one's criminality through primary relationships and so on. And as a spiritual progressive, I was very touched and moved by the hopefulness of that message that you're getting here. So in the last couple of minutes we have, would you like to comment on that? And again, as a divinity, spiritual progressive student and scholar.
Yes, I suppose all those different roles or different titles, if you will, have a way of converging
Yeah.
in our desire to heal society.
Yeah.
That as a psychiatrist who has a responsibility to protect public health and society, as a spiritual practitioner who wishes to bring healing to the world, and as a progressive activist like yourself, I wouldn't quite go so far with myself, but activists who are working to improve the world, all converge in the goal of trying to heal our wounded selves, our wounded world, and to make it a better place, really, where we are more at one with one another, where we can embrace the wounds we bring and help us to heal and bring about health and transformation, which is really a beautiful concept to me, because that is constantly what I work for as a healer, as a doctor, and as someone who hopes to bring about that kind of change in the world.
And you're doing that, Bandy, and I have all kinds of love and respect for you on that. You are one of the people I do look up for too, for guidance and hope, and you're just terrific. So stay strong. Be well.
We're in this together.
We're in this all together. All right, people. Let's not catch this shared psychosis. We can change this. We can turn it around. Tikkun olam, peace and justice and healing. Thank you so much, Bandy, for being on The Radical Imagination. And for all of you watching us, we will see you again next week. And we're going to finish with a short little clip of the final clip from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And this is where one of the inmates becomes liberated from the cuckoo's nest. And I think that's what we all need to do that. And thank you again, Bandy, so very, very much. Take care.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Love you.
Bye-bye!